Welcome to the Feminist Exec, the podcast where women in leadership share their stories, challenges, and triumphs. I'm your host, KP, and together we'll dive into the real talk behind breaking barriers, leading with impact, and redefining success on our own terms. Get ready to be inspired, empowered, and equipped to take your leadership to the next level. This is the Feminist Exec. Let's forge your future. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Feminist Exec. Today I am super excited because we have our first male ally guest on the podcast. Welcome to David Hauser. David is a global executive, a supply chain technologist, and a male ally in leadership. He has experience in over 50 countries in which he's done business. So lots of deep experience that we're going to get into today. Welcome, David.
Thank you, KP. It's a pleasure. Anytime I can collaborate with you is a good day. Thanks.
Thanks for coming. First off the top of everybody's mind, can you share a little bit about your career journey, what led you into supply chain tech, and your executive leadership experience?
Yeah, so way back when, if I go somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 years ago, I was with Oracle, and that really changed my trajectory of my career. And back then, it was a much smaller business, and you did everything within Oracle. And back then, we were having our way with on the database side of things. And that was easier. And back then, if you lost the applications business, you could still do your number on the database business. So some of us decided to go down the applications route. And so that's where I am today on supply chain and reverse logistics. But back then was ERP applications. And then it got broken down into either manufacturing or financials. And then it got broken down into, let's take out HR, payroll, and distribution. So as Oracle continued to grow, it got chopped up. And, when you went down the app space, that's kind of where you were tagged going forward. And it was good. So I'm happy that I did that. These applications have a lot of technology in them. So it was fun to not do the database wins. They were killing it back then and try something a little bit different.
And so since then, you've also worked at several other companies in reverse logistics and WMS. Tell me a little bit more about some of your leadership experience once you got out of Oracle.
Yeah, and you and I share some of this, KP. Oracle was a great 10-year run. And then I did another 10 plus, 11, 12-year run where even the emphasis in my undergrad was always in international. And way back when, international meant really Canada or Mexico. It was pretty easy, right? And then I wanted to go global with that. So we grew that asset, and you were part of that, from $35 million asset where we really needed a lot of partners to get where we couldn't get to because of reach or risk or whatever the case, language, currency, right, et cetera. So was able to really grow that from a couple of basis points of revenue on a $35 million asset to, in 2018, 2019, 600 plus people with GMs in Pan Latam, EMEA, and Asia Pac, and really was able to bring in partners, helping partners, and grow that business to 5 years later with 750, and 5+ years later after that, we sold 45% of that asset to the now current KKR owner and the parent for $1.7 billion. So it really worked. It was really a great experience to understand how you could really grow that asset using partners and people around the world, which is part of what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. So you've led these global teams from across Europe, Asia in particular for you, and the US. What are some lessons that you've learned from managing across these different cultures?
It's such a great point. And if there's one thing that I wish everybody would do is travel a little bit more. I mean, KP, you've lived abroad, right? I mean, you really get this sense of cultural awareness that you just simply can't get. You can read about it, but really immersing yourself. An example, before I went and lived in Asia, I was actually living in Shanghai with Pam, as you know, when COVID started. I immersed myself in an organization called the Center for Creative Leadership and Leadership for Organizational Impact. And so living in these cultures, multi-language, time zone, culture, understanding currency, understanding how to work with different people gives you a much broader aspect on things like diversity, for example. And so those things were important to me, but yet there's a joke about US executives that do international businesses, they don't have a passport. My passport's riddled with visa stamps. I mean, I traveled around the world, rolled up my sleeves, and went and made that business happen and grew much different organizations in much different cultures, time zones, et cetera, to the tune of, roughly 600 people. And it just turned out to be the experience of a lifetime. Did that for about 10 years. It was great.
Yeah, I remember one of the things, because we've worked together for a long time. I remember one of the things you told me early in my career was get some international ink on
Mm.
your resume. Make sure that you actually spend real time in those countries because it's
Mm.
different going grocery shopping and figuring out a gym membership in a different country in a different language than it is
Totally.
staying in a hotel and popping down and eating out. So it's a very different type of experience that changes your worldview and those environments are different in corporate as well, meeting rooms and things like that, than they are
Yep.
here in the States.
Yep. Yeah, I remember, for example, I was in China in a boardroom, and it happened to be during a couple of elections ago. And I remember the Chinese executive said, "Who do you favor? What side are you on?" And I said, "So, well, I'm on your side, and I'm here to help your organization grow and do what we needed to do as it related to supply chain execution solutions." Won that business, and it helped them. So that's another asset. I think we need to remember, as you did, KP, is when we're in Germany or China or Manila, doesn't matter, we're a guest of that country, right? So if
Hmm.
you don't get rid of potential egotistical things that I think some US people are known to do, you're not going to experience it. So carry some currency. Use the social media apps that are current in that country, right? Go immerse yourself in that. And whether it's, food culture, whatever the case may be, go taste it. And then, use all of those nuggets with my 50 plus countries to then make yourself a better person globally. And that's what I hope I've been able to do over the years.
So I want to dig into that just a little bit more because I think that at a top level gives an indication of what your leadership style is. So tell me a little bit more about your leadership style. How do you navigate that fast growth and cross-border operations, different boardrooms, different countries, different languages? What's your leadership style?
Yeah, and there's some Davisms I guess I'll start to throw into this a little bit. One of them is firm, honest, and fair. And so since you acknowledged early on that you and I have collaborated on many projects, whether that be M&A or just growth internationally within marketing or supply chain, I think you need to set some type of basis there. There's a phrase in a Jewel song that I don't know if you follow her or no, but I was flattered by your gray matter. And I'm speaking about you specifically on you were very impressive 10 plus years ago when we met. And yet there was a need within supply chain and within what we're doing to expand the base and get other voices and people to understand what's going on and get them part of the business. And so firm, honest, and fair is a basis that whether you're whatever religion, whatever race, whatever creed you are, you set a basis on that and then understand that cross-pollinating these things. And remember, I was reverse inclusion. So I was a minority on almost everything I did, whether it was easy countries like the UK, where you've been, or more difficult countries like Saudi Arabia. You pick up tidbits on that and you blend all those things into a pot and understand perhaps how you can communicate and provide better opportunities for people around the world. Those are kinds of the things I did. And then I'll take it one step further. So I remember at the annual events that you and I participated in, I had at the end an international piece of it. So partners 50, 60, 70, sometimes at the max 100 partners from all over the world would come and meet with each other. And so it was not just me that had been with all of those partners around the world, but it was, for example, a Brazilian partner talking to a Chinese partner. And so, you kind of double clicked on that in the broadness of that, in watching people do the same thing that I had done was just fantastic. So those are a couple of examples that not only did I enhance, I think, my skill set from working globally, but hopefully I help some others do the same thing.
I love that. The firm, honest, and fair. I think that encapsulates a really great leadership style that brings me to my next question. You kind of touched on this a little bit, but what's your perspective on DEI? As you just touched on some of the cultural aspects and people being inclusive and you being a minority in the room versus being a majority in the room. So, what's your perspective on DEI? And then the all important question is, do you consider yourself a feminist?
Yeah, these are such fantastic questions. And so I'll get the first one off the table quickly. Yes, I do consider myself a feminist, comma, an intersectionalist, comma, a humanist, right, from a global perspective. There must be, and I take this from a different lens, KP, there must be inclusion. And sadly, I think the world has evolved, but in some cases, they haven't necessarily enlightened themselves. A lot of people that may look like me. But when I was in India or China or in other places in the world that may be male dominated, giving an extra hand or some extra time to those that may not have as strong of a voice as I would have was fantastic. And then you have the opportunity, maybe a year, maybe 5 years later, to see how that worked. So not only is the answer yes, but for those out there that don't think it's important, they're going to be in second place because it's huge. And you, again, started this, but the predecessor to the Feminist Exec, right, was Leadership Women in Supply Chain. Huge, right, that you invited me in, and I was happy to be able to do that. So it's critically important that, we live in a world that is so interconnected. And back when I wasn't so much smoking cigars and playing golf to win business, I was reading The Economist. So similar to, I may have been sitting next to you a little bit doing that kind of stuff as well, but it gave you a different perspective to really get into the culture, provide value, and understand where people are coming from. I think in an environment that, while evolving, still hasn't matured to where it needs to be today.
Yeah, I think it's a really important insight as you're thinking about how long you've been an ally and how important that is. As you mentioned, we started Women Leaders in Supply Chain with a former WMS company. We had, I think, 25 people the very first time we ever did it. And by the time we hosted our last one, we had like packed room, standing room only, 300 people and keynote speakers, which was amazing. And you've been on that journey the whole way. So what does being an ally mean to you in your life? I know you've had some strong women in your life as well, but what does being an ally mean to you?
Yeah, so first, I think I can't say that I did it all my career, right? Because in the beginning, and we can go into that a little bit more, it was really about, in my generation, wealth creation. And as I say, another Davism, you can go from hero to zero back in the early Oracle days, for example, very easily. So it is all encompassing to me. Again, being in an environment where, you don't have, maybe more of a monoculture environment where you don't have the ability like you do in the United States to have a more diverse pool of people in the first place to be able to look and see who you can work with is critical to me. So, many examples. A ghostwriter that turned into a marketing executive for me in India, very shy, really always wanted to say yes, but yet was super motivated and educated in what she was helping me do in this case. And so promoting her up, and I look at her today and she leads a business unit there. And that is in a male dominated monoculture, right? Or when I left China to go and work in other parts of the world, replacing myself with a female GM in that part of the world, I gave that individual an opportunity, but that individual excelled. And so you just have to sprinkle the seeds, right? And you'll see those seeds sow over the years. And so I would say, take your time, breathe, relax, understand, and learn. Go travel and go understand different cultures, because it'll make you a better person in the long run.
Do you think that that was key to going from, you mentioned early in your career, you weren't necessarily an ally yet, and now you are. Was there a pivotal moment, or was there an aha moment, or what caused you to go from maybe not being as much of an ally or not an ally at all, which, by the way, thank you for admitting that. That takes courage to say I wasn't perfect. I'm still not perfect.
Far from it. Exactly.
What caused that change for you?
Yeah, so if I look back in the early days, kind of the 90s, and I talked about Evolve, and I'll get into that in a second. It was the Wild West. So from a macro perspective, companies faced risks and people got terminated for, it would never happen today, and you'd probably shake your head and go, oh my God, did that really happen back then? But like things of side letters. And the competition back then was so critical. We were making more money than maybe we deserved or knew what to do with. And so that was kind of the earlier days. And I remember one of my leaders back then, I had a good year, and the gentleman said to me, what would you like to do? How can we reward you other than a President's Club or something like that? And I said, I'd really like to go back to the Center of Creative Leadership, and I'd like to be immersed with other people and understand how to do that. That was a real click follow that by a gentleman who is still a mentor of me today, Sri Lankan born gentleman that lives in the UK, really giving me some understanding and ideas of how to excel globally. And he was fantastic. A third example, and then I'm going to end with you as a fourth example, was I remember maybe 12 years ago, it was in Brazil, and so I continue to learn. That's a continuum, right? So every time I get a chance to do something new globally, I bring a lot of wisdom, but I always pick something up. The gentleman put his arm around me. We walked in the other direction. He told me I needed to turn the volume down. So even though maybe in China, I remember saying, "Gosh, why does everybody seem to scream at each other?" And they're like, "Oh, Dave, that's just normal. That's how we communicate." And then, landlocked by land, but then you go into India and it's a completely different vibe, right? So in Latin America, you need to kind of understand that really getting to know someone and having some social time and turning the volume down. And that was a big one for me. So I can't say that there was that one pivotal moment, but there's been another one and another one over time, and I'm sure that there will be moving forward. And I'll end with you. So I remember, KP, you brought into my life reverse mentorship. So again, I was flattered by your gray matter. You came to the table with knowledge, and yet you came to the table with international curiosity before you had international wisdom. And it was really fun to do those kinds of things and work together as we did on M&A projects and other things. So if somebody can take a couple of tidbits out of it, those would be a few. So there was a moment, but there was a couple of other moments after that.
I love that. And I do want to talk more about continued education in a moment, but you said something interesting. We've talked a lot on this podcast with other guests about mentorship and sponsorship. You said reverse mentorship. What is that, and how do you define that?
Yeah, so I think that the first thing that is parking the ego and understanding that regardless of where you might be socioeconomically, if you're open-minded to picking up tidbits, pieces of information that over the years you can collect in this big pot and use, it's fantastic. I'll give you another example. So similar in a way to what you're doing. There's an organization called Women Unlimited that I'm going to do my second term with. It's a 10-month program of ladies in mid-level management that may be stuck or may need some ideas. And so whatever I can perhaps bring to the table to help them. But these ladies happen to be working at fantastic organizations, and you can really pick up a lot of knowledge from them as well. So reverse mentorship to me, I got to tell you, I've always said it's not necessarily the IQ, it's the EQ. And if your EQ is strong, right, you'll be more open-minded to exploring reverse mentorship that doesn't have anything to do with age, gender, sex, equality. It has to do with you being open-minded and maybe being honest with yourself, saying, hey, there's a soft spot or something I could pick up here. Let me connect with this individual and continue to round out that leadership pie.
That's such a critical insight around dropping the ego and being willing to pick up learnings as you go along. And it leads me to my next question around allyship, which is this concept that men had to give women the right to vote, men have to give women the seat in the room. But your comment about reverse mentorship makes me wonder, what can men learn from women, and what is your role as a male ally in that situation? It's not just for you to be a sponsor or a mentor, but maybe it's an opportunity for you to learn or for other men to learn as well. Tell me a little bit more about how you think about that.
It's so important, right, to be able to double click on these things and help others out there. We just aren't a monoculture. I don't care where you are, particularly if you're on the global stage, right? So going out of your way to understand an unrepresented voice, whether that's female or, well, let me say this, female in the United States versus other countries where even it potentially could be more oppressive, right, than it is here. It's important to lean in. It's important, another Davism, words to deeds. So let's not just talk about how we can help, whether it's the LGBTQ plus community, the ladies community, whatever that happens to be, understand where you are in the environment and look throughout all of the organization on where you can. It just makes sense to me, but it's within my DNA now of everybody can't look like me, KP, on the other side of the table. And sadly, in some cases where it fails, and I would suggest you and I know an example of where it failed, right? Everybody kind of was that male person that didn't leave their ego on the table, and that leads to bad things. So as I look at high level, I think of different cultures and such around the world. I learned in the Dutch culture, for example, say whatever you want, you can't offend me. Okay, and I understand that in the Dutch culture, but that doesn't necessarily mean that culture works in the United States or elsewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that if there's, from a global perspective, that wherever you are, you're in your local economy, doing what you need to do, but be aware that from a culture to an Asian culture to a Latin American culture, be open-minded. Take some time, again, breathe, look at who you've got as resources, firm, honest, and fair. So, right, set some criteria and some boundaries, but really look close and hard to how you can make that pie look a little bit more diverse, right? I mean, I'm Hungarian and I spent my career in other cultures. So it's been huge for me to be able to say that. So your audience that watches that, I'd really, if you take something away from this, is learn about that, because I think as time goes on, so I was able to do that before. I mean, agentic AI, because AI is so yesterday, it seems like now down there, right? So how that's going to change everything in the next couple of years, which is a huge movement on that. But still within that, at the end of the day, another Davism, humans buy from humans. There's an interesting point I'll give you. So post-COVID or during COVID, and it's tangential. There was a study done that after that, whoever the buyer was, male, female, didn't matter, humans didn't want to buy from humans. They were used to the virtual experience, comma, and yet they were saddened or disappointed after the sales cycle that they didn't spend more time with humans. We can't get away from that, right? So it's critically important wherever you are to make those connections and make that stuff happen.
So you said humans buy from humans, and I want to mention a resource that was particularly helpful for me, because you and I both have had the experiences where we've failed hard in international environments because maybe we didn't do our homework right, or we got into a situation we weren't familiar with. The Hofstede analysis, it's HOFSTEDE, is a way of looking at different cultures based off of their power dynamics, and helps people understand level of communication, power distance, the different roles that they have in different cultures. So if you are working in international business or want to work in international business as a listener, the Hofstede tool is really, really helpful and
Awesome.
compares culture to culture so that you can say, okay, I'm working with a Dutch person. As you said, maybe they say something that might be deemed offensive in North America, but it's not in their culture. Or
Right.
if I want to say something to someone that's working in China, how do I phrase that in a way that's not offensive to them in the same way? So I know that that's a
Huge.
resource, but that's, again, the human to human interaction and the importance, I think, of the relationship. And as you earlier said, putting yourself in their shoes and understanding who they are.
It's massively important. In some of the different cultures, make it even more difficult for ladies or underrepresented voices to get one of those. China is a good example, right? There's a lot of drinking, there's a lot of smoking. I do neither of those things. And so how was I able to make those things happen? And I think over time, it's not so much about smoking a cigar and playing golf and making a deal happen. And this is the evolution. We're evolving. I'm not sure in some cases we're enlightened for folks like me, but some of these things eliminate or make it maybe just a little bit easier for those underrepresented voices to stick out in a crowd, for things like what I didn't do in that example of drinking and smoking. But it's even more difficult for a lady in that environment to do that, right? I mean, it's virtually impossible. So I have definitely seen over the 25 years that we've evolved, and some of that is process, some of it's legality, some of it is enlightenment. Sadly, enlightenment might be the third thing on the list, but there's hope.
A little harder to get to. So
It is.
you said words to deeds. And so what advice would you give to organizations or to male executives or people that want to be executives on how to better support equity, equality, and particularly women, but I think support DEI in their organizations? What are those deeds that they need to do?
Yeah, I think about, I advise, I go in and I call myself guesting. So I guest at my undergrad university, and so starting there, right? So
Mm.
young people getting out of school, and I subscribe to them, or I suggest, and I would for other listeners of this and other men that are interested in doing this, is, there's some studies out there that says if you take a reasonable task, let's say diversity, inclusion, equity, and you study it an hour a day for 365 days, you can become super knowledgeable on it, if not nearly expert. I'm not talking about boiling the ocean, I'm talking about something specific. So I talk to people about it, and I've lived my life from a private equity and a venture cap perspective, and with Oracle early on, 90 days. So But what is your big moment? What are you trying to accomplish? And I would say inclusion and equity is massively important and will continue to be. Where do you want to be in 5 years? And then take that and knock it down to an annual goal, and then take that annual goal and look at it every 90 days for incremental improvement on what you want to do. And those kinds of things, I think you're not just talking about it, but you're intentionally moving on it. I think that's hugely important for listeners out there on how you can really truly make a difference. And then in those 5 years, you'll realize, aha, I've got a better diversified business. I mean, I ran the most diversified business, as you know, for years and years and years. You'll look back and say, boy, that makes a lot of sense. And then how can you double down on that, right? And in my case, I think I doubled down on that about getting a culture from one part of the world and a culture from another part of the world to connect. And wow, then it really went crazy. It was really fun to see. But those are some suggestions, right? Take a big piece of the pie that you want to accomplish, break it down into manageable sections, learn about it, and then lean in. As as a famous author once said. So make those things happen and be intentional about it. Words to deeds.
And I like the examples that you gave early on in the podcast about bringing up a ghostwriter and now she's a marketing executive, or replacing yourself with a female executive in a situation which probably historically had a harder time at replacing women positions. So I think there's also concrete things that come out of your education and your practice in how you think about things to actually do and execute in your day to day as a leader.
I mean, it's true. So one was a low-level individual that had so much opportunity in front of her, she didn't realize it. And in the second case, again, reverse mentorship, working with you, firm, honest, and fair, right? The talent pool was such that this female who replaced me as the GM in APAC, I mean, she was the most qualified. Not to say that everybody on the team gave a vote for her, but in my case, my vote was a little bit stronger. She excelled wonderfully, and people go back and look at that and say, wow, that was a good thing. And so when you have the ability to do that and then look over time, and I wouldn't say kind of I told you so, but let's look back on this, right? The wins and the losses. What can we learn from them, and how can we do better in an inclusive environment? It's the only way it's going to work. And for those who don't understand that, you're not going to receive the potential that you could have if you'd be open-minded and make those things work, even to the extent of giving a little bit of extra opportunity to those ladies, women, or underserved people within their own microcosm, if that makes sense, right? Their own culture.
Yeah, it sounds like those are some tough decisions as well, especially if you might have the most power in the room or the most say in the decision, but it might not be the best well-liked decision. So as a leader, particularly around the globe, can you share maybe a tough decision or something that was really challenging, and how did you handle that?
And it's a great one. And 6 years on, and you were a part of this, 6 years on, it's viewed from, and we've talked a little bit about private equity, both the buy and the sell side, as being hugely successful. When our previous organization was looking to expand, so I'll start by saying, when you're a $35 million asset, you need partners to help you get global reach, to reduce your risk, to understand your expense, et cetera, et cetera. As you continue to grow, that makeup of what you need from a partner perspective changes. So we had a partner that became a master partner in Latin America that we look to acquire. Happens with companies all the time. In this case, not only did the CEOs change from when the opportunity started to when it closed, but ownership changed. And it was in 3 languages, in 3 countries, in 3 currencies. So it added a little bit of challenge to it. And so what I had to do after I helped sell it the first time is resell it. And the second time was really bringing people in, you included, KP, on why does this make sense from sales perspective, from legal, finance, and in some cases, lower cost centers around the world, which that happens, whether it's in Brazil or it's in China or it's in Krakow, Poland, wherever it is, right? Low cost centers are important from a global business perspective, which we were in. And so I really had a lot of people from various different functionalities say, yeah, this is a good reason why, maintenance and support perspective, or from a sales perspective, or documentation, or speaking three different languages, or really being able to get in and help from a development perspective of our solution, bringing in those constituents from around the world to help make this happen turned out to be, quite successful. And then again, 6 years on, and it's a little rare, and I'm proud of it, that both buy side and sell side were like, wow, that was a really good acquisition. We're happy that we did that. But the circumstances needed to be there to make it happen, right? So we didn't need partners as much as, in this case, we took the Americas more direct. And in this case, how to do that was via acquisition. So that was really, really, really difficult, not just from two ownerships and two CEOs, but three languages, three currencies, and multiple time zones. It took a lot of work, but it was fantastic.
And it sounds like also from your perspective, you were running partners. So to bring it on as an acquisition then meant that you, in a sense, gave away some of your partnership because it became part of the company. So that must have also
Totally.
been a tough decision as well. But if you
Yeah,
don't bet big, you don't succeed big, right?
yeah, that's true. I talk about this quite a bit. A lot of people look at this as perhaps cannibalism. I don't. I look at it as expansion of the pie. So, concept another Davis and partners helping partners. Boy, that was hugely unpopular at the beginning. Because I'm not going to let this partner come in and help me implement this deal, but get license sales and maintenance and support, regardless of its supply chain or whatever business it is. Organizations have a professional services organization, and that tends to be lumpy. And if you can take the lumpiness out of that, so if there's a big win in China or a big win in South Africa that a Brazilian partner can help do over time, and it takes time, right? People need to be comfortable with this. They realize we've got a happy customer that introduced us to someone else, and I don't need this partner anymore. A la the pie grows instead of worrying about being cannibalized by one partner versus another.
Yeah, and it's interesting you talk about the pie because it's also applicable in the equity sense in terms of inclusion, equity, and feminism, which is this outdated concept that we've talked about before, which is there's a limited pie and women are fighting over this limited pie, but the idea is you just grow the pie. There is no competition in women empowerment because by bringing awareness, by bringing education, by bringing that visibility to female empowerment, you're growing that pie instead of fighting for the same piece or trying to cannibalize it.
I mean, perfectly said. Particularly, right, with what you did early on in your career before you became an executive, having a belief that women in supply chain at that point in time was important. It was needed, KP. I mean, it's just, I mean, you could see it, right? You just have to open your mind up and understand that these things, and and how long ago was that we did that? Maybe 8, 9, 10 years ago. And you look at it today, it has evolved. It has gotten better. But sadly, in some cases, there's still, and maybe it is, the stress of private equity and looking at a rule of 40 or 50, and you're too focused, in my opinion, on the numbers and not the business and the people. At the end of the day, if you don't have that working in your favor, it's not going to be successful. So you said it better than I do. There's not competition. There's a growth in the overall opportunity base when you bring more women within supply chain or anywhere else in the world into the mix, or those other underserved people within their community. And it almost always is ladies, whether it's ladies in the United States or in China or in Asia, or Southeast Asia, or some other part in the world. It's a great point. Great point.
You mentioned private equity, and I want to spend a couple minutes on this because you have so much experience with
Yes.
private equity and working within private equity structures. How has working within private equity, venture-backed companies shaped your definition of success? And the reason I ask that is because a lot of people have different levels of executive experience, whether it's a public company or a private company. And there's some nuances, I think, with PE and VC-backed companies. How has that changed your perspective of success over your long career?
Yeah, great question. So there, and I guess I want to categorize some of the private equity organizations out there, some that are more inclusive based, that come in. And so at the end of the day, at the very, very end of the day, people need to understand that private equity, even venture cap at the smaller end, are there to satisfy their shareholders, right? So at the end of the day, they're going to do some M&A. They're going to take asset A and maybe involve asset B, C, and D to grow out functionally the opportunity as well as the return on the investment. So keeping those things in mind, that's the end of the day what they want to do. So I tend to want to add a human element to that and say, I got it. Let's make sure that we communicate that down to all of the people, all of the employees, so that they can play a role in making that happen. And sometimes, in some cases, it's really too micromanaged. Let's let the subject matter experts and the leaders within their business do what they need to do and provide some guidance, provide some, best resources, depending on who the private equity is, do that, and maybe be a little bit more transparent. In some cases, I saw sharing quarterly results, understanding what the top 3 or 4 KPIs are, 5. That's all they need to know, right? What can you focus on and make a difference over that quarter, as opposed to being so stressed out and so concerned over the rule of X, right? In making those things happen. So I got some cold water in the face on working for first with Oracle, that wasn't private equity, but it was, hyperscale, hyper growth, and then into an organization that was really a foundation, and then working with private equity on, blending all those things together. I think that you can have some great results in blending that. Sure, at the end of the day, we'll make money and we'll do well, but, remembering that if it's all about just the numbers, you're going to miss the boat on some of these things.
That kind of goes back to your other Davism, humans buying from humans, right?
Totally.
It's all, for now, it's human beings are still running companies. We'll see how agentic AI starts to change some of that.
Give me a quick stat on that, and you're a statistician
Yeah.
among other things. I was reading and spoke to a person over in Dubai that says by 2030 they think that the first organization that will generate per employee $50 million. Think about that. Today we're happy with 250,000, maybe a million, maybe 5 or 10, right? But in 5 or so years, enter quantum computing and agentic AI, and that's what the young generation needs to deal with. That there could be an organization that's generating upwards of $50 million per employee. There's a lot of stuff going on in the background that isn't employee related if that's going to happen. It's amazing.
Yeah, and it brings up a question that I've had a few times. In fact, we've discussed it internally at my current company around bias in AI, particularly as it relates to perpetuating the stereotypes or the inequities that we currently have, because AI is trained on data and data is historical. And if historical data is skewed white male, skewed
Totally.
American business versus other types of business style, as you're feeding in the data into the AI agents, how's that going to impact? And there's probably some things that we can do as we think about using AI to identify those bias and those challenges. Have you thought about this at all as you're talking with executives about AI?
I sat on an AI panel in New York City not too long ago that was done by a professor in California. And there was folks like myself that were vendor partners. There were people that were dealing with AI, Fortune 500 organizations, and there were 2 things that came back. And based on, let's say there was, a pool of 25 and maybe I was number 15 to talk. So one of the things I wanted to chat about, somebody else already had. So I had 2 ready to go. And in mine was ethics. And so not only are these large language models that you're talking about that are being inputted by humans, but double click on that or riff on that a little bit when you think about agentic and computers talking to computers, then it's going to even multiply that even more. So, do I believe that there needs to be some type of governance on that we aren't quite there yet? I do. There's organizations out there that this isn't specifically AI, but it's got something to do with AI. Lorries, 18-wheelers, truckers moving from point A to point B. That technology is already here. Legislation hasn't caught up with it, but that's going to become more and more ubiquitous. One of the things I like to chat about with college students is if insurance rates go down, and if efficiencies go up, and if death rates on the highways go down, is all that good for the lack of, for the potential losing of human jobs on that? And so how do you balance that? I'm a follower of Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan Chase, and he talks about, well, this could be as equal as the combustible engine and electricity and the internet all combined. So we've got a massive opportunity in front of us. And how do you balance those things out? So you go to the eye doctor, and quickly via AI, they can tell if you might get macular degeneration, but you also don't want that doctor then to be prescribing a drug because the drug company might be in the pocket of the doctor, if that makes sense. So how do you make sure that all of this running at a speed faster than many cases humans can do? How do you make sure that there's some governance ship on that? That is the biggest thing that I think needs some maturity as we look forward on AI and agentic AI.
I think that's such a huge topic, both because I've been seeing a lot more about AI and autonomous vehicles,
Mm,
robots. I work in the robotics space. I watched a
sure.
documentary last night about autonomous vehicles being tested in Texas and the Waymo expansions and
Yep.
how that technology is going to start becoming ubiquitous. And you mentioned some of the benefits, but it's going to require some reskilling of people and some changes in how we've done our jobs. It is akin to the Industrial Revolution I've read so
Totally.
far as it's going to completely change how we think about doing work. And so there's that piece, which I want to touch on in just a moment, but this ethics question
Mm.
is such a powerful thing that I don't think enough people are talking about is what are the ethics models that we're even giving to AI? Because in business school, you can sit down and have an ethics class, and there's 50 students, there's 50 different codes of ethics based off of whether they believe in John Stuart Mill or Kierkegaard or Kant, just different types of ethical
Mm.
models.
Mm.
How do you see us getting to a point of even being able to govern it or recognize when ethics might be in play?
I mean, a question for you. In some cases, it's just not there yet. And so here's an example. I like to use, in my position and what I do for a living, to use AI as an editor, not an author. So I would ask you, and I would ask people out there, and I was with the dean of my undergrad, my great friend of my business school a couple of weeks ago. I asked her this question. I said, so if I have an idea or I have a paper, a thesis or something I want to do, and I ask, an editor, an AI generated editor to help with that, is that synthetic content or is it organic content? Right. And I think that that's so critically important to understand that. The last organization I was at full time, large organization, 7,500 people, we were paranoid about a person that was lower level that was perhaps generating some code under a time constraint, and nobody's looking around. Maybe I'll run this through an editor and let it help me with the code. And then that provides, because as you say, there's right now humans that somehow out there that was generated by something that touches someone, whether you can figure that out in a lawsuit or not, to be determined. But how do you protect your rights on that? And how do you make sure that ethically you're being compliant? We've set up ethics standards for a lot of stuff in the past, lots. But from an AI perspective, I think that the technology has outpaced the ability to make sure that there's some guardrails on that, if that makes sense. And I think that the large organizations out there that are leading this AI initiative in second generation AI initiative. Maybe there's some leaders that need to do that. Maybe it's a combination of a corporate world, if you will, and university and governance that, from a whether it's the United States or some other governance communities that put a governor on that. But again, risk is huge for me. And back to the AI thing, and you mentioned, driverless taxis in California or in the bigger cities. Those I've spent some time in those. I don't know if you have or the audience has, but man, it's a great experience. You see an amber light and there's not a human in the seat. And depending on when that amber light started, they accelerate through or stop. I mean, the amount of AI and real-time data, there's a lot of research going on out there to reduce latency even more and get real time. So all of that stuff that's going on, boggles the mind. So, I hope that we, continue to think about that more going forward. And that's for the, that's for me to help put that seed in people's minds, but it's that next generation that's going to be burdened with that responsibility to make sure that they do it right.
You said a couple of things there that are really interesting to me in that it's very, very timely. In the last 3 weeks, I've been to two separate investor sponsored AI go to market conferences where you get the top levels of the organizations in the portfolio in a room talking about how they're using AI in their go to market, custom GPTs, data matching, analysis, AI chatbots, sales agents, SDRs, all of that. And so I think there's this push from corporates, particularly like in the investment PE VC area, to experiment with this AI. But then I saw literally today, MIT published a study about brain activity in ChatGPT users and non-ChatGPT users, and how they actually saw people that used ChatGPT to write the content for them and then they would edit versus people that would write their own essays and then use ChatGPT to edit it for, kind of do the fine editing, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Their brain activity, the scans on their brain were different. And that if we're not careful, we let AI do too much of the real human thinking for us.
Yeah.
And we lose our capacity. In essence, we dumb ourselves down by using AI too much. So, as you mentioned, maybe even having your own ethical guidelines around how to use AI in your day-to-day life, because otherwise, if AI can do it, your job is replaced, right?
And that's out there. And I worry to some extent that that's out there. The CEOs for very large private equity organizations are talking now today about the use of AI and how, let's say, research, or let's say compliance, things that AI can very easily replace the human person on doing that. Why do I use that example, and why is that important? Think of the many, many college students that are graduating here in the summer around the world that go to the big 4 or 5 or ... right? If they're, the second tier, the hugely important organizations. And there's companies out there that are saying that they're going to reduce, or in some cases eliminate, some early on staff members because that work stream is, they're saying if you're competing against AI in looking at a 10Q or an annual report and coming up with what are the top 5 things that you need to talk to this executive about. I mean, KP, that used to take us some days to do, and reading that stuff called paper and going through it online. And it's done now in seconds. That's a real challenge. I mean, and I would say even in the West, we aren't necessarily as advanced in some of these things as they are in the East, whether that's these mega applications that people are spending more time on, and there's more metadata gathered, and so there's all of those things that can go on with that. And you look at repetitive fast food, for example, and how potentially, that's a huge industry around the world. How many humans need to be in there when you really look at, even with your example on being in the robotics section, the introduction just this year, I think I can remember forever, a humanoid robot or something to look like version 1 of a humanoid robot. So a robot now doing a pick, putting it in another robot, yikes. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
It makes me think of one of the earlier comments that we talked about and put a pin in, which is this idea of continual learning. And as we think about AI, that's one piece of it. AI is, looking to replace certain jobs, whether you're a truck driver, a warehouse worker, or an office worker, or a marketing manager, or even some level of executive analysis person that helps with financial reports. How do you, in your experience, evolve your learning over time so that you stay relevant, you stay up to date, and you keep your skills honed so that you always have that executive level perspective to offer and leadership?
That's such a critical question. Thank you for bringing that up. For me, and I almost use a sports analogy. It doesn't matter, if it's ladies sports, men's sports, right? Practice, 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 and then you go out for the games or the big matches. I think you would agree, in technology, we do almost the opposite, right? So how do you've got a longer career left certainly than I do. How do you, KP, or how do people out there stay contemporary, I would say? How do you keep your folks on your team excited and motivated? And so I think it's super important, and I'll go back to say the Center for Creative Leadership over 3 times for me. This last one was leadership for organizational impact, where not only am I immersing myself, in this case it was in Singapore, immersing myself as the only Western male in that class, did it by design because I was going to go live there. But whether it's that or you're amazing at how much you consume in reading and keeping yourself not just relevant for today, but for the future. The different generations have different needs, and being able to expand that over 3 or 4 decades, everybody's going to be different on that. I think that that's not practiced enough on how do you stay relevant. And I think that part of that is DEI, right? So staying relevant as it relates to that. I mentioned earlier, you're right, you take a subtopic and you spend an hour a day on it over 365 days and you become pretty good at it. Those are the kinds of things that I think we need to do. However, I will tell you that the big disruptor, so for me, it was almost a Wild West early on, side letters, things that were crazy that you don't see anymore. So we've evolved, but there's this next thing, AI agents, or, you mentioned robotics. There's also some that load and unload trucks super fast, lorries super faster than humans can do. And it's dangerous. And so how are we going to deal with those kinds of things from a technology perspective? And how are we going to stay current and relevant for that next generation of leadership and really understand, again, I would say, at least for the foreseeable future, at the end of the day, humans buy from humans. So you've got to keep that team of humans motivated. And certainly in technology, I think there could be some room for improvement on that. So those are some examples.
You said something I want to touch on just a little bit, which is
Sure.
You said evolve your learning style based off of what's coming out. I think that's really powerful because you have this old kind of trope of the boomer doesn't know how to print out a PDF, on their computer. And
Totally.
Pretty soon it'll be the millennials don't know how to use AI the right way or some other technology, right? So a couple of things I've noticed that have been helpful in evolving that. One, I think you mentioned is the immersive leadership, like getting into a classroom, not necessarily at a university, but like a dedicated learning program with other people that you learn from.
Yep.
I think reading, as you mentioned, is another one, reading books. And then a lot of the content that my team and I have been using are from some of these vendors. Sales enablement platforms have their own universities, or LinkedIn Learning has its own courses, micro courses for things. Harvard University released a bunch of free classes. Early on in my career, one of the things I did was a ton of classes on edX.org. I'll put it in the show notes, but edX.org. I took certifications from MIT, Berkeley, Wharton, all from my computer at home. And then I think there's this idea of micro learning too, which you kind of have to be careful about, but TikTok is a great place to learn different things. I follow a bunch of creators that talk about AI and marketing and AI and supply chain and robotics. And while you can't believe everything, you kind of have to make sure that you know that they're citing the right sources for their information. Those micro learnings, I think, are another way to stay up to date. So it's not just one style of learning, but I think, as you mentioned, evolving that over time so that you're capturing the latest and greatest to stay relevant.
And I would say, so if I could coin what you just said, it's investing in you. And sometimes people don't want to do that, whether it's the cost of a new piece of hardware or like you said, LinkedIn Learning is fantastic, and it's got a ton of stuff out there, and MIT and the other university perhaps settings that you mentioned. But time is worth something, and so you've invested of anybody I've known. So I'll go back to reverse mentoring with you as a colleague and now a great friend. Have helped me in that. And so I remember you did Book of the Month Club, right? I mean, this is years and years and years ago. I can't tell you I did all of them, but it's like, wow, that's a good title. I'm going to do that. And so when we have so much data and so much stuff coming at us, you really have to look at that pie and carve something out. The hour a day for 365 days as an example. Spend an hour a day on reading something and making sure that you're investing in yourself. If you don't, others are, and you might not find yourself. I like to use the word, how can you be a leader in a contemporary environment? And that changes, right? That's not a fixed, static, point that I made. Because the next generation, back in those days where you and I ran together internationally, there were people older than me, perhaps in the UK, people younger than me, perhaps in China, and they wanted different things. My marketing lead in China, she was getting married, and she did two different marriages, a traditional one and a theme one. And so she wanted some money via Red Envelope, which is a WeChat application or sub application. And my gentleman in the UK wanted some time out of the airport to just go be quiet and get whatever he needed to get done. Completely different, right? Completely different parts of the world, completely different ages, and really being able to understand and making those things happen. I call it non-monetary compensation, hugely important.
That investing in you, I was listening to an audiobook a couple years ago about this 1% idea, that if you do
Yeah.
1% a day, it
Yeah.
compounds so that 1 hour per day isn't just 365 hours in a year, it's actually compounded. So you're having exponential growth rather than zero growth or slow growth.
Totally.
So it's that 1% per day that's pretty amazing. If you're doing that, you're doing more than most people, right?
Wait until there's a neurochip implanted. And so day one, you know everything about medicine. And then you can advance from that. Maybe
Not
I'm a
far off.
futurist. Maybe I'm a futurist, but I think those things are coming.
I love it. Well, looking back, what's one piece of advice that you wish you would have received earlier in your career? If you were to talk to Dave, 20 years ago, what would you have given him?
Yeah, I'm going to use the word evolve again. We've had the opportunity to have more people, and I was pretty early on in this, take me under their wing and help me and guide me and coach and counsel me. I wish that that would have happened like in the early 90s, and it really wasn't the thing back then. The thing back then was trying to figure out technology and ERP applications and globalism and those kinds of things, where you just really had to focus on overachieving. And I would say back then, a lot of us were promoted over our ability to execute on that. And you had very short time to do that. So you were completely kind of maniacal on making that happen. I wish that some of these contemporary leadership programs that I went to, I wish I would have had more global experience, back in the day. I wish I would have had that mentor to help me that I got later in my career. If it's a career of 35 years, happened fully 15 years into it. I wish it could have happened a lot sooner. And so I try to now, in a different place in my career, to overcompensate, to oversubscribe, to really go and help people do that. And that can be somewhat, I guess, of a legacy that I wasn't thinking about 30 years ago when I started my career. I was thinking about being successful, and I wish that I would have had a broader scope and help those other people. But we were all young. ERP applications and the whole supply chain and all of that stuff was early on. And looking back at the younger Dave, I wish that I would have loved to have grown up in an environment like this, where I do think that tools and the speed of getting those things available are much more relevant than they were in the past. And we've evolved, not necessarily enlightened. In some cases, yes. In some cases, we've got a ways to go on that.
I love that. Any
Thanks.
final Dave-isms for the audience before we wrap up our time here?
I mean, I think of words to deeds and partners helping partners, and don't let good and excellent be the evil of each other. Take time, breathe, right? I mean, spend a minute, and one of the things that Pam and I have been able to do well is have a career. In our case, we didn't have children. It doesn't matter one way or the other. Life is difficult out there, and there's a lot of stuff coming to you. So I would suggest try not to get overwhelmed with too many things coming at you, because in 5 years it'll be super overwhelming, let alone 10 or 15 or 20. Life is difficult as it is. Try not to let it get overwhelming to you. Again, take a little bit of time, breathe, and do what's right. And do what's right from an inclusive perspective. Do what's right from an equality perspective, and think about that. And if that's kind of the one thing I can leave this podcast with, that I've been able to do really, really well, I think, and continue to learn from folks like you, KP. Thank you very much for all of the wonderful times we've had, and we will going forward around the world. It's been fantastic. And those are a couple of thoughts that I'd leave you with. So thanks for your time.
Amazing thoughts to end on, David. David Hauser, everyone, thank you very much for taking the time. I'm so grateful to have you as our first male ally guest on the Feminist Exec. Thank you very much.
It's been great. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, Kate.
That's a wrap on this episode of the Feminist Exec. Thank you for tuning in and being part of the conversation. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. A special thank you to our composer, Peter Legault, for the original music. I'm KP, and this is the Feminist Exec. Until next time, keep leading, keep rising, and keep forging your future.